The shocking truth about women in the public arena. My name is Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, and this week we're talking about Parshat Ki Tisa. The following passage appears in the Torah portion of Ki Tisa. If two men get into a fight with each other, and the wife of one comes out to save her husband from his antagonist, and puts out her hand and seizes the other by the genitals, you shall cut off her hand, show no pity. End of the quote. Shocking indeed, but what can we do? The Torah says what it says. The language seems clear, and so does the rationale. Now, a small number of us, a really small number, may embrace this value system wholeheartedly. Others, I think, will reluctantly accept it, but still others, perhaps the majority of us, will throw up our hands in despair and wonder how the Torah could be so primitive and so misogynist. But all of us would probably agree that the ancient Jewish Hellenistic writer of 2,000 years ago, Philo of Alexandria, was properly reading the intention of the text and its worldview when he wrote the following. Marketplaces, he wrote, and council chambers, and courts of justice and large companies, and assemblies of numerous crowds, and life in the open air full of arguments and actions relating to war and peace, are suited to men. But taking care of the house and remaining at home are the proper duties of women. And let her not be seen going about like a woman who walks the streets in the sight of other men. But when men are abusing one another or fighting, for women to venture to run out under pretense of assisting or defending them is a blameworthy action and one of no slight shamefulness. It is a shocking thing if a woman were to proceed to such a degree of boldness as to take hold of the genitals of one of the men quarreling, and let her punishment be the cutting off of the hand which has touched what it ought not to have touched. Now, I'm sure that most of us don't like hearing what I just read from Philo, but we think it would appear that what he writes clearly reflects the rationale behind the biblical text from the book of Deuteronomy that I read at the opening. But believe it or not, Philo got it all wrong, at least according to the ancient Jewish sages. Our sages in the Talmud and the Midrash completely ignored his worldview. They completely ignored what he had to say on this matter. Now, it's true that a number of the Christian church fathers followed in his footsteps, but Jewish tradition would hear nothing of it. The rabbis of the Talmud and the Midrash bent over backwards to give the verses from Deuteronomy a completely different interpretation. Philo might have been Jewish, but in this case, as in many other cases, his reading of the Torah was more Greek than Jewish. And while the echoes of his wisdom reverberate in the halls of Christendom, sometimes, in the Beit Midrash of Jewish tradition, his views have almost never been heard. So how do our rabbis interpret this law? They universally maintain that the verses are only talking about a case in which the woman wielded undue force and unnecessarily endangered the life of her victim. In other words, a case of pikuach nefesh, of danger to life is created, and the woman in the verse is the perpetrator. According to one opinion, under such circumstances, a good Samaritan may do anything to loosen the woman's grip, even going so far as to sever her hand in the act of grasping the man's genitals. And why? Because it's pikuach nefesh, because we're saving life, saving the life that's being endangered by this evil woman. According to a second opinion, the verse is saying that if nothing was done to stop her in the act, then after the fact, when the case comes to court, the court assesses a fine upon her equal to the value of her hand. But the Talmud says explicitly, and all the sages agree, that if her act constitutes the only means available to save her husband, that's not what the verse was talking about. But if there was a case in which a woman got involved in a fight between men and did what she had to do to save her husband, then she would totally be within her rights and would be beyond reproach. Because a woman, just like a man, can use whatever force and whatever means necessary to save herself and to save others from attack. According to our tradition, the verses quoted speak about a woman, but only because it would usually be a woman whose only recourse to intervening on the side of one of the combatants would be to grab the genitals of the adversary. The law, however, is not specific, according to our sages, to a woman. If a man were to do the same thing, the same directive would apply. The verse is just giving an example in the more common case. Commonly, it's women who would do such a thing, but if a man would do it, the law is not different. The same directive would apply. Despite Philo, this case has nothing to do with defining a woman's place in society. So now we ask ourselves, is the rabbinic interpretation forced? Perhaps, so it seems. But the rabbis were willing to go well out of their way to distance themselves from any thought that women have anything but equal rights to defend themselves and their families. Her status in the public domain vis-a-vis tort law is indistinguishable from that of a man. Yes, indeed, this whole matter is absolutely shocking. But it's not the putative discrimination against women that is so shocking. Rather, what is shocking is the insight of our sages. We are amazed and we wonder how such an enlightened and egalitarian worldview the sages managed to take root and flourish in the context of a Hellenistic world 2,000 years ago, to whose conventional wisdom it was so diametrically opposed. Shabbat Shalom, and thank you very much.